At 4:12 a.m. on October 11, 2025, the sky over Russia's Far East burned. A powerful explosion tore through a logistics hub near the North Korean border. It lit up the pre-dawn darkness for miles around. The blast was not a random industrial accident. It was the catastrophic end of a secret military convoy. The target was a massive shipment of ammunition from North Korea, valued at over $700 million. This cargo was destined for Russian artillery units fighting a grueling war in Ukraine. It never arrived. Instead, it became a symbol of Moscow's profound logistical vulnerability. The explosion represented one of the most significant single losses for Russia's war machine since its full-scale invasion began. Within moments, fire consumed dozens of train cars, transport trucks, storage facilities. What was meant to be a critical resupply for Russia's depleted forces became a smoking crater. The event sent shockwaves far beyond the immediate blast zone. It exposed the fragile nature of the arms for resources pact between Moscow and Pyongyang. As dawn broke over the Primorsky Krai region, the full scale of the destruction became terrifyingly clear. Satellite imagery. Western intelligence agencies' open-source investigators painted a picture of total ruin. Train wagons were twisted into unrecognizable shapes of blackened steel. Heavy cranes used for transferring cargo had melted into the ground. Warehouses that once held crates of munitions had collapsed into heaps of burning debris. Their contents had fueled the inferno. Infrared analysis provided even more detail about the event. Initial flash registered temperatures approaching 2,000 degrees Celsius. Imagery revealed a sequence of blasts, not just one. That suggested a chain reaction as fire spread from one container to the next. More critically, it pointed away from a single accidental detonation. Several distinct epicenters were visible, consistent with a coordinated, precise strike. Local Russian emergency crews were overwhelmed. Fire brigades could do little against a blaze fed by tens of thousands of artillery shells. The contents of the destroyed convoy were a catalog of Russia's most urgent military needs. South Korean intelligence, which had been monitoring North Korean arms production closely, quickly identified the cargo. It consisted primarily of tens of thousands of 152mm artillery shells. These munitions are the lifeblood of Russia's Soviet-era artillery systems, which have been firing relentlessly since the war began. The shipment also contained a significant number of anti-tank guided missiles components for multiple launch rocket systems. In total, the value was estimated at a staggering $700 million. This arsenal was the product of a 2024 arms deal between Moscow and Pyongyang. As Western sanctions tightened their grip on Russia's defense industry, crippling its ability to source advanced components and raw materials, the Kremlin turned to North Korea. Kim Jong-un's regime, though possessing older technology, maintains vast stockpiles of compatible ammunition. They allowed its artillery to maintain a high rate of fire on the battlefield, compensating for their declining accuracy with sheer volume. This flow of arms had become essential to sustaining Russia's offensive operations in eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine. Section 4. The journey. The ill-fated convoy followed a route that had become a well-established corridor for the clandestine arms trade. The journey began at North Korea's port of Rason, a special economic zone with direct rail links to Russia. There, the artillery shells and rocket components, often disguised as industrial materials or machine parts, were loaded onto trains. From Rason, the cargo traveled a short distance to the Tumansky River, which forms the border between the two countries. It crossed over the Friendship Bridge, a solitary rail link that has become a choke point of immense strategic importance. Once inside Russian territory, the train continued to a logistics and loading yard in the Primorsky region. This is where the cargo was to be sorted and transferred from rail cars to trucks for the long overland journey west. For months, this route had been under intense surveillance by Western intelligence agencies. Satellites tracked the movement of ships into Racine and the subsequent departure of trains toward the Russian border. Signals intelligence monitored communications related to the transfers. The entire operation, while secretive, was not invisible. Then, just after 4 a.m., the signal from the location was abruptly replaced. Instead of the heat signatures of engines and equipment, sensors detected a massive, blooming thermal event. The predictable path had led to a predictable target. Section 5. The competing narratives. Immediately following the explosion, competing explanations for its cause began to circulate. The Kremlin's official line, cautiously floated by state-controlled media, described the event as a transport incident, or a fire caused by the mishandling of volatile materials. This narrative aimed to portray the disaster as an unfortunate accident, downplaying its military significance and avoiding any admission of a security failure. Russian war bloggers, while acknowledging the serious loss, largely echoed this theory, blaming poor safety standards and the notoriously unstable nature of older North Korean-made propellants. However, evidence increasingly pointed toward a deliberate strike. The pattern of the blasts, as seen in satellite imagery, suggested multiple, near-simultaneous detonations, rather than a single starting point that caused a chain reaction. This spatial distribution is a classic indicator of a precision attack, designed to destroy the entire convoy comprehensively. The strike occurred during the most vulnerable phase of the logistics process: the transfer of munitions from train to truck. This is when the cargo is most exposed and concentrated, making it an ideal moment for an attack aimed at maximizing damage. This leads to the most likely, though officially unconfirmed, explanation: a targeted strike by Ukraine or its allies. Presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak stated that every shell that fails to reach the front saves Ukrainian lives. A clear nod to the outcome without claiming credit. Section 6. The ripple effect. The immediate military effects of the explosion were felt most acutely along the front lines in Ukraine. In the days following the blast, Ukrainian military intelligence reported a sharp and measurable decline in artillery intensity, particularly around Avdiivka. Kreminna. Ukrainian soldiers recorded a reduction of incoming shell fire by as much as 40%. The sudden lull provided a desperately needed respite. Fewer casualties. A chance to fortify positions. A window to conduct limited offensive operations. The loss of the shipment sent a shockwave through Russia's military command. The destroyed shells and rockets had been allocated for specific upcoming operations. The winter offensives had been predicated on ammunition from North Korea. With that supply unreliable, plans were delayed or drastically scaled back. Emergency orders to boost domestic shell production were issued. Russian factories, hampered by sanctions and shortages, could not ramp up overnight. Inside the Kremlin, panic and recriminations followed. President Putin reportedly convened an emergency Security Council session. The chain of command was shaken and trust in logistics severely damaged. Section 7. The fallout. The political and economic fallout hit Moscow and Pyongyang hard, placing their partnership of convenience under immense strain. For North Korea, the loss of a $700 million arms shipment was a severe economic blow. This single convoy represented a massive portion of its expected annual foreign currency earnings. In a nation perpetually starved of cash and crippled by international sanctions, this revenue was critical for stabilizing its economy and funding its own weapons programs. The spectacular failure of the delivery also damaged Pyongyang's reputation as a reliable arms supplier, potentially making other prospective buyers wary. Kim Jong-un's showcase of military-industrial strength had turned into a public display of weakness. For Russia, the fallout was primarily strategic and political. The incident exposed the profound vulnerability of its wartime logistics. It proved that its reliance on pariah states was a high-risk gamble. future shipments from North Korea would now be subject to even greater scrutiny and face a higher probability of interdiction, increasing costs and uncertainty. International reactions were swift and coordinated. The incident prompted the United Nations to reconvene talks on tightening sanctions against North Korea's arms exports, while Japan pushed for stricter maritime inspections in the Sea of Japan to intercept future shipments. Even China, North Korea's most important ally, voiced concern over instability near its border. Ultimately, the world had just witnessed the cost of dependence, the reach of intelligence, and the fragility of an empire built on borrowed weapons. The explosion near the Korean border wasn't just the destruction of ammunition, it was the collapse of an illusion. In this war, supply is destiny.